for a conversation about the big story. What does it mean to be an American? Please welcome to the stage President of the Tenement Museum, Annie Polland.
Good evening, everyone. This is really exciting. I've always wanted to partner with the Atlantic Festival. I went last year when it was in DC, had a wonderful time. But the best part of this is that I now have a microphone with my initial on it. So this is very special. I want to introduce and welcome to the stage Clint Smith and Xochitl Gonzalez. Excellent, and I want to welcome all of you to the Tenement Museum. Has anyone been here before? Okay, so welcome back. And all of you have gone on a tour. Many of you have gone on a tour just now. Some of you saw the apartment of Joseph and Rachel Moore. Some of you saw the apartment of Fanny and Abraham Rogoshevsky. Some saw the Saez family and others. There we tell the story of about 12 families that lived in the tenements between 1863 and 1980. And that's how we explore what it means to be an American. We explore the stories of the families who lived here in the time period that they lived to gain a better sense of who they were and what was going on. I think the thing that's so exciting about this place is that we tell the stories of people who never imagined that they'd be the subject of a museum exhibit, right? And I think today, in the world that we're in right now, where there's a lot of talk about exceptional history and extraordinary history, the work that we're doing here is even more important because we're coming from the point, or the vantage point, that it's our ancestor stories. Most of us come from humble roots, right? I mean, you can raise your hand if you didn't come from the humble roots. But most of us come from humble roots, and these are important stories to tell, and we're pleased and grateful that we're able to tell those stories. And so now we're going to put those stories in conversation with the stories and the work of Clint Smith and Xochitl Gonzalez. Both of them writers for The Atlantic. Xochitl is also a novelist and the author of Olga Dies Dreaming and Anita Monte. And her next book coming out is called Last Night in Brooklyn. Yeah. And we're excited to welcome her back to the Tenement Museum. Also excited to welcome back to the Tenement Museum Clint Smith, the author of How the Word is Passed, the New York Times best-selling book that's now coming out for young adults as well. And Clint was just with us in July when 50 teachers, 45 teachers from 29 different states, red states and blue states, came to study American history through looking at how we can tell immigration history and Black history together. So we're excited to welcome him back. Yeah. So in 45 minutes or less, we're going to tell you what it means to be an American. But I thought, because it's kind of a weighty question, I didn't want to just jump right into that. I thought we'd warm up by telling our own family stories. I'm going to ask Xochitl and Clint to tell a family story, and this is inspired by our Your Story, Our Story project. We have 35,000 school kids that come through the Tenement Museum each year, and so often when they're hearing the stories of Fanny Rogoshevsky or Mrs. Wong or Ramanita Saez, they think of their own stories. They think of objects in their homes that tell their stories. And we don't have 35,000 apartments to decorate. But what we did do is we created a website where the students can upload a photo and a paragraph describing their story, able to research it. We now have over 17,000 stories, not just from New York City, but across the country. And now, tonight, you're going to witness the addition of 2 new stories, one from Xochitl Gonzalez and one from Clint Smith. So I'll start with you, Xochitl. Tell us a little bit about an object that tells your family's history, and we'll see it up there.
Oh, is it going to come up? I just got it framed and just picked it up in time to take the photo for this. But it's my grandfather's World War II hat and some of his medals. He was one of 11 and lived in Red Hook in a very teeny-weeny apartment. And so when he was about 14, he actually joined the CCCs and was out building national parks because it was a steady paycheck, and they gave you room and board. And then when he was 16, his mom, actually, she was literate. She was literate in 2 languages, so which is kind of unusual for the time, but she wrote a letter allowing him to enlist early. And so he was the baby of his division and the only person from New York City in his division. And he was so proud of this. And it was like, I was just saying to Annie, it was like he met all these young men from all over the country. And the only time we ever took vacation, like we never took vacation, but we did take one trip to Mobile, Alabama for the 9th Infantry Division convention. And he would get these, it's so weird because like my grandfather only talked to his siblings mainly, and he was very deaf. And so like when he got a phone call, everybody knew it. Because he was like screaming, he's like, "Hi!" And so anyway, he had these like random buddies that like would live in the South or like in the Midwest, and I always just thought he was very proud, and I think what he would tell me about was when he first came from Puerto Rico, he would get like beaten up by his the white families in the neighborhood because they were the first kind of Puerto Ricans that got to Red Hook. And he was like, and I came back and I was like, no one will ever beat me up again. It really changed his sense of he'd had this sense of pride. I don't know. Again, and I just, he was so proud of this service that it was like a big giant part of my grandfather raised me, so it was a big part of my growing up. Yeah. And then you'd get him at a family event and give him a few drinks and he'd start telling you war stories, and it was good.
Where did he go overseas?
Oh, he was everywhere. He was in he stormed the beach at Normandy. He liberated a German town. I wrote about it, and I did a piece about Latino military service, and I think I traced it like that there because I sometimes forget these little details. But I know about the German part because speaking of weird photos, there is a photo of him with his girlfriend from Germany, and we're like, wait, is that woman pregnant? And we don't know. I'm hoping not. Is that a weird dress, or is that woman pregnant? But that was something that
might have some cousins.
No, my cousin and I were at my house one night. This is everyone had passed away already, and we were suddenly we were looking at the photo, and he was like, cousin, this photo's weird. So I don't know. But he also had never been, obviously he was in Puerto Rico and back to the U.S. and he did that a bunch. But then he was had gone to Europe, he was in North Africa, he'd travel, and I don't know. It was he was very content then. He just kind of came back and started a family. But he was he always would talk about this. And I think that generation had that sense of obviously you come in and you liberate a town. There's this point of feeling of pride, right? That he had without being obnoxious about it at all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Clint, you had a story also connected to World War II.
Yeah, so my great uncle Lawrence is my grandfather's older brother. He was born in Monticello, Mississippi, and he was 19 when he went off to World War II. Black soldiers largely weren't able to engage in combat roles. They weren't given guns, and so most of them operated in logistics, operations, sort of menial tasks, janitors, killing things up. So he was part of a group called the Red Ball Express, and they basically drove supplies. So the beaches of Normandy were stormed, and it opened up the way for supplies basically to be brought into the European theater. And so they had all these boats that would come and bring the stuff, and they would load them on to the Red Ball Express trucks, and they would drive the trucks to the different units throughout France. And I hadn't appreciated when I first learned about it how dangerous it was, because there would be bombs and landmines basically set up along the road, because what we know of warfare is that if you can disrupt supply chains, then you can you set yourself up for success more effectively. And so it was incredibly dangerous. Many people who drove the trucks for the Red Ball Express drove over landmines or were bombed and were killed. And so there was this feeling from so many of them that every time they took a mission, it could be their last. And it felt, it made them feel expendable in a different sort of way. And I got, I've been thinking a lot over the past few years, I wrote a book a few years ago called How the Word is Passed, and it's about how different historical sites across the country reckon with or fail to reckon with their relationship to the history of slavery. And so I went to all these different places, monuments, museums, memorials, communities, towns, neighborhoods, to try to get a sense of how these places were telling the story or failing to tell the story of slavery in America. And then I wrote a story for The Atlantic that was published in 2022 that was sort of jumping off from that and thinking, well, I've traveled around the U.S. and seen the ways that so much of the U.S. is failing to fully account for its relationship to the history of slavery. Now I'm going to go to Germany because maybe I can put German memory of the Holocaust in conversation with American memory of slavery, and like, is there something we can learn from there?
Yeah.
And also, is the story, there's a sort of two-dimensional story that we tell about Germany and memory from here, right? We're like, we do memory really bad, they do memory really good, and like, we need to be more like the Germans. And I went there and I was interested in that question, and obviously what you find is that the landscape is much more three-dimensional and complex and contested than you anticipate, but part of what I also learned is that I didn't understand the history of World War II in any way that was meaningfully commensurate with the impact that it had on shaping the contemporary world order. And then I started having conversations with my cousin, Millicent, whose Uncle Lawrence was her dad, because he died when I was maybe 12. And so, there's all sorts of questions that you become an adult and you like, I wish I had asked this, I wish I had asked that.
Does anyone have that phenomenon?
Oh, yeah.
I always joke that I wouldn't need to fundraise anymore if I had a nickel for every person who I meet at the Tenement Museum who comes into church. I wish I would have asked someone this or that.
Truly.
Yes.
And so there's so many things. And one of the things that I felt myself wanting to ask was what motivated him to fight for a country that was killing every people in his town. Like, men in his town were being lynched, and he still made a decision to go fight on behalf of this country. And I got really interested in that question, both in the context of the Black American experience, but also like Navajo code talkers, right? Like, what motivated the Navajo to go fight for a country and use a language that they were actively being told not to use by being sent to boarding schools where they were punished. They would use that language, and then now being asked to use that very language to fight on behalf of the country that was putting them in boarding schools, moving them off their land. And Japanese Americans, right? What does it mean to go fight for the U.S. when your family is in an incarceration camp in California?
Even for Puerto Rican.
Exactly.
What is it like to fight for a country that doesn't recognize the... Yeah.
We were given citizenship just to fight for the country. Like, it was basically like, we are low on recruits, so let's like get, and actually I was thinking this, like, it was like, it's such a testament to what you're talking about that, they did census work. Part of when they brought the census to the U.S., when the U.S. took over Puerto Rico, they brought the census, and it was the first time that people on that island were asked to identify themselves as a race, and everybody knew about Jim Crow, and it was like, well, I'm not going to be accurate, because now I'm going to, what's going to happen here? And so there's a weird designation on my grandfather's, one of the voyages when he came, because it was before the plane, right? They take the boat, and they were categorized as West Indian. Which I thought was so it was such and you're anyway, but it's this injection of also shunning something because you're told, well, I don't want to be that because I don't want to be treated badly, and but then it's also what made me think it was God, your ancestor, my grandfather would have what a different post-war experience though also, right? Where it made him feel oh well now but then you're going back from that job to also then facing the same animosity, right?
That's so interesting because I hadn't considered. I know that I've had a lot of I used to be a high school teacher. And I had a lot of Puerto Rican students, and it was both for Puerto Ricans, for Dominicans. I think across many Spanish-speaking parts of the Caribbean, there's this complicated relationship to race. And my Puerto Rican students or my Dominican students, we talk about race, and they'd be like, well, I'm not black, I'm Dominican, or I'm not black, I'm Puerto Rican. And I'm like, you're darker than me, but it's interesting because I hadn't considered the extent to which that is the residue of an intergenerational phenomenon of actually, it's not, I think there's a story that can be told of oh, well, I don't want to, black is bad, and I don't want to be considered black. But there's also this fear, right?
Yeah.
There's sort of like a measure of self-protection. Like, I don't want to, I see what's happening there.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen to me.
I don't want that to happen
and
to me.
So if I say that I'm something else, then maybe I will not. And I think that that's not something I had considered before, is the extent to which somebody might have designated themselves that way as a means of like self-preservation.
Oh, I mean, like, it's really fascinating to read about those early censuses and like how they keep getting whiter and whiter, but it's self-identification, like, right? Like, it was just like a fascinating thing, right? And then you see the legacy. Yeah, yeah.
And so when your great uncle came back, did the same thing happen? So so Sheil had mentioned earlier that her grandfather felt like no one's going to beat him up again because he fought for his country. Did that ever come up?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of the things I wish I could ask, but no, he came back to 1945 Mississippi, and so no, I mean he was somebody, and I think this is the experience of Black American soldiers broadly. I mean, this is the double V effort, like fight for victory in Europe, and then hopefully we'll get victory here in the U.S. And it's this project of like constantly having to prove that you deserve to be here, constantly having to prove and demonstrate your citizenship. And it was so interesting to see the corollaries in the Navajo community, in the Japanese American community. Obviously it takes on different shapes, but this idea that like, oh, if we fight for this country, then surely people won't be racist to us anymore. Like, surely they will see that we have liberated the world from this evil force, and we will be brought into the fabric of America. And that was most of the time not done, but even when it was done, in a very sort of uneven
And I
way.
think that's the value, too, of some of these individual stories and tracing through families, because when you read textbooks, often things are just kind of like, and then after this happened, or we're on to a new stage, without thinking about the ways that things linger.
Well, I think that's been one of the things that's been like heartbreaking in this moment about watching kind of what's going on with ICE is that, and military service, because you have a lot of people, not just like Latinos and undocumented people, that it's like, well, this is a pathway to citizenship, and they take it, and then some of those people have gotten deported. But then you also see like people that were cooperating with our troops, like in Afghanistan, that were like, okay, we're going to bring you over, and then getting deported again. And so like, I do think that there's this like, I don't know, like it's like the role of the military in like there was this sense in the past that like through service, an act of, like through service and sacrifice, because you're putting yourself in danger, I am proving how much I want to be a part of this country. And then it's a heartbreaking thing to neglect that, like to see that we're reneging on our side of that bargain. Particularly, I think, because military service now is so uneven from a class perspective. And so there's so few people that are giving anything in that realm to the country. And so, like, you kind of then see, like, okay, so real, like, it's a lie. Like, it was, we're reneging on a bargain, but then there's a whole sort of people that don't ever have to even engage with that. Yeah.
And in I'm just going back to Germany a little bit, because in that in the article that you wrote, one of the things that I thought was so interesting is that you point out that it's much more complex, right? It's not just that the U.S. doesn't do it well and Germany does it well because of all the fraud. You said where things did work, it was because ordinary people, like not foundations, not the government, but ordinary people came up with ways to remember and. So
yeah, no, I think that, for folks who've been to Germany, I think it can be very easy to attribute the landscape of iconography and memory to the state, right? Like, oh, the state engaged in this sort of national project to place down the stumbling stones and to build the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe and to memorialize the train stations from which they were. But so many of these places, like the Stolperstein, for example, Gunter Demnig, who began the project, it wasn't because he was commissioned by Berlin, the Berlin Council, or by the national government. He was an artist whose father had fought for the Nazis, and he was searching for a means of contrition, right? Like personal contrition, like how, like my family, my ancestry, my country participated in this horrific, the worst genocide in in modern history, and how can I begin the project of like making amends for that? And so he placed down what's called the Stolperstein, and there it translates to stumbling stone. It's these kind of 10 by 10 centimeter bronze stones that you place in the ground, and it has the name of the person who was taken by the Nazis and persecuted by the Nazis. It was has their birth date, their death date, and the place where they were taken. And so it's this fascinating experience of like you'll walk through the streets of Berlin, and you're walking past one building, and they're placed in front of the buildings from which the people were taken, right? And so you have this experience of walking past a building, and you see one Stolperstein in front of a house, and you walk further down the street, and you see 3 Stolperstein in front of another house, and then you walk further down, and you see 5. You walk further down, and you see 12, and you can look down, and you can see the birth date and the death date, and you begin to say like, oh, this was the child, like this is a 7-year-old, this is a 5-year-old, this is the mom, the dad, the grandparents, and you can begin to sort of tell stories, and it's this remarkably intimate experience of looking up at an apartment or a home or building and recognizing that this was the very place from which people were taken, and it literally stops you in your tracks. But that again was because one man began putting them in the ground. The government tried to stop him. They were like, you can't do that, like you have to stop. And they ordered a construction company to go extract them from the ground, and they refused. And so, and then at some point it galvanized so much goodwill and attention, and other people began wanting to participate and asking, sharing stories of people that were, Jewish families that were taken from their community, their neighborhood. And so it's one example. Now there are over 100,000 Stolperstein across 30 different countries in Europe. And so it's this ever-growing project, and it's inspired countless different not replicas, but sort of similar projects where, in New England, there's a project called the Witness Stones Project, where in Connecticut, and they are trying to find the places where enslaved people lived or were held or went to church, and to put down stones to remember that. In South Korea, when I went to Seoul, they've placed down stumbling stones where they believe former comfort women were held. And so it's been contagious in this remarkable sort of way. But again, it didn't come from a sort of like, it wasn't top down. It wasn't a piece of legislation that was written. It was because one man decided that he needed to do something for him, for his conscience, for his country, and it was born and grew out of that.
It's interesting, so that artist dealt with a past that was difficult, and out of that dealing with a difficult and complex past, something that built community and something positive came from that.
Oh, that's a crazy idea.
It's a crazy idea. It's very, very interesting. So Sheila, I want to take on another way of looking at this, because I think all of us who study this history, all of us who are here at the Tenement Museum clearly believe that ordinary people's history is important, and if we study history, we're going to be led in really important, we'll learn different skills to have conversations and things like that. What's gone wrong? So in other words, if it's so obvious that these are the ways forward, what's happened that has made it so difficult for people to connect to this history or a sense of a broader social fabric through that? I know that's a little bit of a big question.
No, it's a big question. I think I touched on this a little bit last time, but sometimes when I look, my adult years, I graduated in 1999, and so in the 25-ish years since then, it's been fascinating to watch adoption of technology, mindlessly. I don't know, it's it's just that seems cool, and and I sometimes think that we had 24 semi-antisocial people that were I don't really like people, and people don't like me, so let me figure out a way that I can reduce communication with them. And we all were just sounds great. I could never approach somebody in a bar, so I'm just gonna bloop. I think, the thing that confounds me, so I'm just gonna vent about it for a second. I was in San Francisco a few years ago, and I was God, because I had some family, my dad's side of the family. I had a kooky aunt in San Francisco, and so I would visit her, and I was like, this is a very different city than it was, and it felt like desolate, right? Like, and I was like, I just want to see somebody. Like, it's like giving me, like, sometimes being like alone in the street is more frightening than being around, like even if you're like, I don't know, there's a bunch of people over there, you're like, whatever, I don't care, like, hi, thanks. Like, and it's like so desolate that I felt nervous. And then I saw like a Waymo go by, and I was like, even more. Why would I not? Like, is it such a burden to talk for 5 seconds to a taxi driver? And so I think that, like, and that it's bothering you so much that taxi drivers have jobs. Like, how many, like, particularly Dominican and Puerto Rican immigrants in New York were livery cab drivers for forever? Like, that was like the livery monopoly on licenses. Like, and I think it's so strange to me that this profession bothers you so much that you need to eradicate it. Like, but I say that to just say that, like, it's a lot of people. Well, I can tell you now because I've been doing all this research, like, you know, large sums of money actually make you much more paranoid about being around people and distrustful. And you actually, when you look at Doge, it's so like, it makes total sense psychologically because there's this presumption that nobody's actually doing the work that you're paying them for, the more money that you have. And so we've sort of had this idea of like, well, let's just get rid of all these people. But then what it's done to the average person is now, I used to just stand in line in the coffee shop and you might chat with the person. Oh, hi. Like, sorry, my neighbor has a dog named Barack. And I was like, oh, how's Barack doing today? Like, but like, you know, like you start making chit chat. But 90% of the people that come in that shop ordered it on an app and then just walk in and don't say hello to anybody and walk out. So there's one interaction. Like, you used to, like, if you don't have laundry in your apartment, you'd go to the wash and fold. I literally watched the people that own my wash and fold laundry, like, raise their kids when I was living in Fort Greene. And now there's an app, and you put the bag outside of your unit, and somebody gets it, and you don't know who had anything to do with it. And like,
and those interactions are so important for cultivating empathy.
They're cultivating empathy, and it's also like letting you know that there's lots of people that are good at lots of things. There's not just one. You know, I went to my public high school here was actually founded as a trade school, and then ended up getting really good at like lots of things. Like, it was a trade school to teach people to build sets, and then like because of that we got a good theater program, and then it just kind of became a pretty good high school. But like what I loved about that space is that we were always taught that there's lots of forms of intelligence, and because we don't have engagement, like with different kinds of people doing different kinds of work, and we're not valuing that work because that work has now become invisible. Groceries just show up. You never see the person that actually shopped for you if you like Instacart. We've turned labor invisible, and it's become a segregated, like I think something like 60% of tech service jobs are done by Black and Latino people, and it's created a segregation in our workplaces, like that's so crazy. So like across the board, it's not just racial segregation, it's class segregation. But I think in general, we've decided that people aren't valuable. And like the idea that there's AI on dating apps to talk to people before you bother to talk to them is so creepy and weird. And I'm like, we can't even, you want to avoid people that much? Like, it's so strange. And I think it's really shred that sense of, there's a fabulous artist, I wish I remembered his name. I don't know if anyone saw it. He did this project where he took photos of people gathered in groups and removed the cell phones from it. And so it's so weird when the phone isn't there because it's just people not standing together but like looking down at their own thing. And it really shows you how much we've like given up. And I really do think those tiny interactions, like, you know, like, because and I think COVID unfortunately amplified it because we were supposed to keep space from each other and we got very used to it. And I think now, because I can tell you, like, I was in New York and I had to go and get my MFA in Iowa, and so I had to leave. I never leave. Like, I didn't really leave a lot, but like when I came back, I was like, no one's talking to anybody. Like all these little baby relationships that made a community feel like a community get
New York
dissipated.
is so different that way because even aside from taking a subway train, right? That you're just so much of New Yorkers are brought together in that, and then COVID, of course, cut that off, and we're back on the subway. But it does seem like New York is maybe a little bit better than other places with regard to this interaction, but what you're saying with regard to service and the way that the kind of like
regard to valuing work, and I think when we hide it, we then think that we forget about the people that do it, and we render their lives and value invisible, like in a lot of ways. Like, and I think, you know, my best friend she was the daughter of migrant farmers in the Central Valley, and like, she'll always, like, you go there and you're just like, somebody picks my fruit. Like you cannot hide from it, but I think most people can. And I think that that's kind of what we've seen happen with all forms of tiny labor that like used to be like not like it was your neighbor, like that was your neighbor instead of just a person that does this like low paying job. Like,
at the museum too, I think about Leslie Harris, the historian Leslie Harris, who writes about Black life in New York. And one of the things she says is that when you look at the census for the jobs that not just Black New Yorkers, but lots of immigrant New Yorkers had, it's all like, again, laundresses, coachmen, waiters. All of these jobs were jobs that were like connected to people. And she talks so much about the importance of all of us stopping to kind of value the importance of that labor and that work. And I feel like one of the things that's helpful about this place is like you're actually in the homes of the people doing those jobs. You're seeing the kind of the sewing machines, or you're seeing the different tools that would be used to do all of these jobs.
Real. Yeah.
And it makes it real. And there are people that held these tools. And again, I think the other thing about that too is that everyone is doing similar jobs or in similar situations in a densely populated space. So they're there to kind of like help each other out and build community. But thinking back to what's wrong in our country right now. I want to give you a turn, Clint, to talk about this. Like, how do we know history is important. Why is it that it's so hard to kind of use that as a way to kind of bring people together?
It's interesting thinking about objects being a mechanism through which we understand the past. For me, that's often place, right? So I travel to places because I believe that there is a sort of singular power in putting your body in the place where history happened. It creates a physical proximity, which then creates a sort of temporal proximity, which gives you a deeper sense of empathy, right? So when I'm looking down at the Stolperstein in Berlin, I feel a different sort of proximity to the families who were taken from these homes. When I'm standing in a slave cabin on Whitney Plantation, I feel a different sort of proximity to the history of the people who were held in bondage for 250 years. When I'm, in South Korea and standing, in the place of a former comfort station. When I'm in Nagasaki and I'm standing on the place where the bomb was dropped. When I'm in Angola and standing in an execution chamber. Like what I do and what I've realized for myself is that in a similar way that an object can enhance your understanding and almost humanize history, I think that going to a place strips it of the sort of historical abstraction and makes it feel real. And one of the things that I've found in my journeys abroad and in the journey in my time here is that this idea that we're in this moment where the administration is telling us we have to, teachers can only teach what's considered a patriotic education, or the Smithsonian, Trump says has been talking about slavery. It talks about slavery far too much. That we need to emphasize the good, and we need to stop focusing on these negative things. America is a place that has provided unparalleled, unimaginable opportunities for millions of people across generations in ways that their own ancestors could have simply never imagined. It has also done so at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people who have been intergenerationally subjugated and oppressed. And both of those things are the story of America. It's not one over here or one over there. You get to pick this one and not pick that one. Both of those things are the story of America, and it's so bizarre that we would suggest that we shouldn't talk about both, because when I think about myself or when I think about people I love, I recognize that there are things about my life that I am proud of, and there are things that I wish I could have done better. And what you try to do is say I wish I could have done that better. I made this mistake, and what I'm going to do is learn from that so that I can move forward and try to be a better version of myself in the future. And so the idea, we recognize that among all of ourselves, and so the idea that we wouldn't, attribute the same sort of rationale to the country we live in is so strange and bizarre. It's a place where we have to hold the both andness of this country in this moment. I feel really complicated. I've always had a complicated relationship with America. I have an especially complicated relationship with America now. I can only imagine, that when I think of the harm that this country, in my name ostensibly, is doing here, is doing abroad, is doing the way that we are both failing and actively harming so many people, and it is that, and it is also like my son and his friends on the playground, and it is also my daughter at the park, and it is also my neighborhood, where there's people congregate at the bus stop from all different sorts of background, and so we have always been the both and-ness, and we still are the both and-ness, and part of the importance of a place like the Tenement Museum and others is that it demonstrates that when you focus on the human aspect of it, like the individual person, there's no notion of this sort of like black-white tapestry, not racially, but like in terms of the flattening of history. Like history is three-dimensional, it's complex, it's messy, because people are three-dimensional and complex and messy.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about what you've been saying, Xochitl, about like community and community cohesion and how things are built, and that like there's something just in these dynamics that should help us understand what's happening. And I think too about Clint, you and I were on WNYC in July when the Teacher Institute happened, and there had been a caller in when I was waiting for ours. A caller in there was like some conversation with a very progressive person on, and the caller in said, "My name is Danny, I'm from New Jersey, and the Civil War ended. And the Civil War ended in 1865, and slavery ended, and so there's no racism in this country. This is not a racist country." And then he says, "My grandfather was from Ireland, and he came with nothing, and he worked hard, so there is an American dream, and there's no racism." Like, so it was interesting because the caller in on our show, he didn't call in on our show, but a caller in had heard that and brought it in when she called ours, because it was obviously sitting with her, and it was a way to talk about it. But how do we both and that? Like, if you were able to talk to Danny and be able to respond, because there is something in it where he feels like his story isn't being recognized somehow. And I wonder if, like, so Sheila, you wrote about, in the comfort class, you wrote about how people feel disconnected now, that there's been a way in which the elite class has talked about American history and politics in such a way that a whole core of people feel very disconnected from what is happening. And I'm going to try to connect it back to Danny.
Yeah,
So we can.
I mean, I think, I do think that what you've kind of seen is, as there's been less kind of class integration also, first of all, just now I've done a lot more research than even when I wrote that piece, because I've been working on a book about class, but like, anytime somebody feels that they are falling behind somebody else, it actually clinically brings up feelings of rage and frustration. And there is a correlation, like a studied correlation between, like, for a white American ethnic group, let's say like a white group, to be feeling like they're falling behind, like there's a correlation in rising racism and rising xenophobia. And so I think that one of the problems that the comfort class, like the kind of elite class, is like, it's so interesting the way these things kind of compound. It's not an intention where everybody's like, we're going to make sure that everybody here gets Ivy League degrees and was the child of upper middle class people. But when you have, come work on my campaign, but we can't pay you more than $1,000 a month, who gets to take that job? Like how, like it's like how these industries, like income kind of creates this bubble. And so what you end up having is content created, like across the board, like people talking about blah, 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 like only a certain type of thing, and not talking about like the financial sense of immiseration that people are feeling. Like, and that actually, not acknowledging it creates even more rage. And what we saw in this last election was been done to talk about history. It's been done so many times in history. It's like you're feeling bad because this group of people are taking things from you, and that's not actually what's happening. But it's like I'm already prone to feeling that way, and now you're really going to make me feel that way. And then when that still doesn't get better, it's like there's just all this rage, right? Like,
and it's the same. I mean, you see it. The thing that's been illuminating for me is that, like, America is not necessarily unique in that,
No.
right? Like at all. Like it, you know, I've been working on this World War II book. I've read so many books about the Holocaust and the Third Reich, and it's astounding to read about the extent to which after World War I,
Yes.
And specifically after the Depression, just the way in which Germans were looking
Yep.
around and they were like, I don't have a job, I don't have food to feed my family. Somebody's telling me it's the Jews,
Yeah.
right? So that's, and then all of their attention was oriented in that direction. You see the same thing, you know, in the Pacific. You see the same thing in Japan.
Yeah.
It replicates
Oh,
itself.
yeah. And I think, you know, to take it back to the, like, what do you say? Like, you know, what do you say to Danny? Like, I think that what's happened particularly, and he's talking less about, like, you know, need and stuff, but I think what I saw in this last election that was very frustrating to me, and I always talk about the egg meme with the handmaids. I want to say that I laughed at this meme, okay? Like, and then later, I had
What
something.
was the meme?
The meme is like 3 women from The Handmaid's Tale, and one of them says, I know, but I thought he'd lower the price of eggs. And, and I laughed, but then later I stopped and I thought about it, and I was like, when you had no money, there, you know, what did we ate a fried egg over rice. Like, that's like when it was the recession and I own my own business and I had nothing, I was like, I'm going to the bodega and I'm going to get some rice and I'm going to get a dozen eggs. And it was the most affordable, like, form of nutrition that you could get. And I thought to myself, it's not just that we're diminishing it and laughing about it on the other side, but we almost refuse to talk about it as though it's a real issue. And so I think to the Danny thing, it's like I think the framing, actually, I talked to a social psychologist about this. I was like, how do we talk about privilege in a way that doesn't, like, alienate people? Like, and he was like, well, I think that it's like, how can you talk about what you have and not say, I don't want to take that away from you or begrudge you, I just want other people to have it too. And so it's like the Danny answer to me is like, and that is so amazing what the Irish people were able to overcome, considering, but not every group experienced that experience. Like, and so you have to remember Jim Crow and Red Line, like, you know, like, it's like, but like, just, it's like, how do you, like, I think that so often, like, until this person said this to me, my gut instinct would be like, Danny? I'm not going to say it because it's very Brooklyn, but like, but yeah.
I think that too, the thing is that, like, people are fearful of having to tell a new story about themselves.
Yeah.
And if you have to tell, if the proverbial Danny has to tell a new story about his grandfather, that means that he has to tell a new story about himself.
That's right.
And so suddenly when you say, you know, well, Danny, you know, the Irish came over and they were, you know, they became white in the same way the Italians did. And, you know, well, if we think about the Homestead Act, maybe your grandfather had access to the Homestead Act, but the Homestead Act prevented black people from having access. It also took away land from Native Americans. So it can, you know, so Danny has a story that, like, oh, my grandfather came here, my great-grandfather, and he, you know, came over through Ellis Island and then went west and then, you know, worked on this arid soil, and he was digging away and spent his whole life making a home on this land that was barely livable, and that created the opportunity for my parents, and that all might be true, right? And so the story that Danny tells himself, like, my grandfather worked so hard, he had nothing, he had 2 cents in his pocket, and he came here and he worked and, like, built this for our family. You can tell that story, and you have to tell the story about the indigenous people who were removed from that land so that your grandfather could work on it. And you have to tell the story about the black Americans who weren't given access to the Homestead Act so that they could go out west and build it. And so it's not to your point, like you talked about, it's not saying that's not true, but
Right.
it's saying this other part is also true. And you
Like a
have to hold,
step-by-step
yeah,
process,
and you
or
have to
like-
hold all of that.
I think the only other thing I would add in, though, too, is that the brain is actually, it's one of the odd things about being American. To me, like, what I would say is, like, the greatest thing, like, whenever I'm away, like, and it's like, oh, loud Americans. I was like, we're loud because we can do and say whatever we want in our country. And, like, so, like, I always think, like, that's, like, like, in a weird way, the greatest thing. But one of the things that, you know, our system here does create is inequity, right? Inevitably, like, any capitalist system is going to have inequity. But there's, like, inequity actually makes humans uncomfortable. Like, and so because you feel uncomfortable about it, the mind is like, I have to rationalize why I have more. And usually we go to hard work, right? And so I think one of the reasons why the erasure of labor is so bothersome to me is that, like, we're basically, like, because I never tell people that I work hard, because I had, like, a really hard job before this. I was a wedding planner, and it was very difficult. And so I always am like, I work a lot. I don't work hard. Like, because I think the idea that, like, well, you have all this, you work so hard, you deserve it. And I'm like, well, everybody then that works really hard deserves it. Like the person laying bricks and cleaning up the bathrooms here, everybody deserves this. But it's like, but unfortunately the system isn't set up that everybody has access to it. And so I think that sometimes Danny needs that story, because maybe Danny had a much easier life than that grandfather, and is like, I need to feel not bad by why my life was easier than somebody else's life was easier. And I think if we could start to like make peace with the fact that like it doesn't all set down, but like why am I supporting that inequity? Because if it's less, nobody will feel as bad.
And it's okay to have your story change a little bit, right? Historiography is the story of change. Is
That's
that you
right.
make new discoveries, you go back, you change. It's not like the whole narrative is thrown out, but it actually makes certain parts of it set into relief because you've added something to it. But it reminds me too of the wonderful part in your chapter on New York, that I know I talk about all the time with you, where the tour guide, Damaris, right, is leading a tour of Lower Manhattan, and it's a mixed group of people in the sense that some are from Europe, some are from Germany, some are from Asia, and then there's a few New Yorkers. And the Europeans are learning for the first time about there was slavery in Manhattan, and had no idea. And they're like, talking about racism, and so a European said, I didn't realize New York was like this, right? Because everyone, and the New Yorkers in the group who were older had this sense of what New York was that was like, didn't want to let that in. And they were like, no, it's much better now. It's much better now. And describe how Damaris handled it, because I think this is, I want to find Damaris and give her an award, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think it functionally, she was listened. And so this older white woman was sharing how she doesn't actually think that the legacy of slavery is still present in New York, and there's not racism in New York, and this is a place where like her parent or grandparent came here and worked hard, and it's fascinating how often that comes up. They worked hard, and that's they had nothing when they came here from Italy or from Germany, and this is a place where like if you just give all of your effort and that you can rise up and make your way to the top of the food chain, so to speak. And Damaris was listening, and she's just like, thank you for sharing. That may be your experience, but that might not be the experience of so many other people. And this goes back, to what we were talking about at the beginning. This is why it's so important to teach American history honestly. Because if you don't understand the way that millions of people have been systemically prevented, intentionally prevented, generation after generation after generation from having access to the primary levers of upward mobility in this country. You just look at the New Deal, right? The New Deal was one example. The New Deal was the single greatest catalyst of intergenerational wealth over the course of a century. And it was given to one group of people and very intentionally not given to another group of people. So you have the single greatest catalyst of intergenerational wealth that was given to white people that gave them access to Social Security, Medicare, home mortgages, healthcare, housing protection, all these minimum wage benefits. And then you have that same stuff, because it was administered by the states, was not administered to black people in the South, where the vast majority of black people lived. And so you have the greatest catalyst of wealth was given to one group of people and that affords them opportunities intergenerationally that are not afforded to another group of people. But if nobody ever teaches you that dynamic of the New Deal in school, or the 100 other examples of the way that black people and other groups of people have been systemically prevented from being able to access upward mobility, then you start to tell a story that says, well, it's New York. Anybody can have it, as long as you work hard, you can have anything. And it allows you to sort of operate in this delusion that you have certain things because you or your family worked hard, and other people don't have certain things because their family didn't work hard. And you look around and you assume that the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is because of the people in those communities, and not what was done to or extracted from those communities generation after generation.
And even pulling back to the stories that you both told about your own family history, thinking about World War II, certain people returned from World War II and were able to benefit from the GI Bill, and certain people were not, right? So that there's this continuation of that, decade by decade examples that help to understand that. So I think there's something, right, about like listening to people, hearing their story.
I think that, there's some amazing things that are baked into the cake of being American, but I do think, and I've written about this, like there's like sort of there's a romanticized version of like kind of the Ellis Island era of America, of like where I'm coming for free speech, and we sort of lean on that's like a driver, but like
they were coming because they needed to make a living.
Well, that's what's driven most migration, but like I think that like we've really but it's like we had great marketing called the American Dream, and it was powered by meritocracy. And I think it's the one thing that's kind of really dangerous for us, because it's so, first of all, it's become so rare. I think something like 4% of people actually go from being poor or working class to actually being high net worth individuals, or up at the top 5% of the top fifth percentile of incomes. It's not very, very common. In fact, I think only about 40% of people don't go anywhere, from the lower working classes. So I think that but it creates this idea that because of meritocracy, if you did it, then these other people just didn't. And I think that that's the part that turns us, gives us an excuse to sort of say well, I don't know, we did it, so why couldn't you? Instead of saying what's not working on the system? Right? What's not working in the system? And that's the part that I think is a little dangerous. Can I just tell a very funny anecdote about changing personal history? My Aunt Lillian, for a generation, told everyone in our family that my great-grandparents met because she was walking the beach with her governess in Puerto Rico and found a shipwrecked sailor, and that she then left all of this comfort in order to be his bride. And then I went to Arecibo. My cousin had gone, and he was like, "Cousin, have you gone to Arecibo?" And I was like, "No, I've been to San Juan a bunch of times, I never got there." And he was like, "I don't think that story's right." And I got there, and I was like, there was no governess. There's not even a port there. I think he was just a drunk guy on the beach. I think it was a neighbor walking on the beach there. I don't know. These were not wealthy people. Nobody. But this was a narrative my Aunt Lillian made up, because I think she just wanted to feel somehow that she wasn't just from a poor background. It was that is how she felt better about things. It's oh, we're here because, my mother made a choice. By the way, also, it's the plot of Corazón Salvaje, which is a very popular novella in the 70s. And that was the other part that was finally, I was telling somebody this story, and they're that's kind of the plot of Corazón Salvaje.
Yes, that's great. Well, I think that we haven't exactly come down to what it means to be an American, although I think one of the very important components of it is understanding our family history, being able to actually decode some of the myths that maybe have been passed down as part of our family history, listening to others' family history, but really teaching history, right? Teaching history so that we can put all of this stuff together.
And just holding multiple things at once.
Yeah.
We do it in every other facet of our lives, we do it. So the idea that we shouldn't do it when it comes to our own history is silly.
Well, it's a beautiful way to end. I want to thank you, Xochitl. I want to thank you, Clint. And I want to thank all of you for coming to explore what it means to be an American. I hope you, too, want to explore your own family histories. You can add your family story to your story, our story, and read it. We can read about each other that way and help form a better America. So thank you so much for coming.